perspective, if you consolidated, extended it out to 30 years, you'd be paying $750, and so you'd end up paying a whole lot less. And the forgiveness aspect is another thing. So we kind of talked about what the payment would be, what your debt, your debt to income ratio would be. We'll also talk about kind of your total debt. And when it comes to total debt, your forgiveness at the end of 20 years, so that's going into the private market, is about $177,000. Now this is on $109,000 debt. It doesn't make kind of intuitive sense, but if you think about it in terms of the time value of money and accrued interest and things like that, then there's a significant benefit for you. I see some furrowed brows. Everybody? Any questions? Sure.
I'm wondering, if you do public interest and then you switch over to private, what is the number of years for forgiveness?
Well, for public, it's actually 10 years, and we actually have an example of for 10 years coming up. But so if you go and you work for either a nonprofit or I guess public defender, something like that, then there's a program put in place, public service loan forgiveness, where you have a 10-year component to it rather than the 20 to 25-year kind of window that we're looking at for private.
Like 5 years in public interest, but then you switch over to private loan.
Sure. Yeah, they're not really interchangeable. As much as we love them to be, they're not. And so I think the one thing is that if you're making qualifying payments for public service and then you go private, then the idea is that you would still have made, if you were in IBR, which ideally I think you would be, then you would still be qualifying for that longer piece of forgiveness. But again, that's just something that you want to kind of make sure of. Another thing I want to kind of point out that right now the tax forgiveness, sure.
Does IBR, does it defer interest? So I'm paying under if I wasn't doing IBR, I would have such and such payment, which would consist of principal and interest.
Sure.
And by doing IBR, I might be paying not even the interest.
You're absolutely right.
So that would be adding and compounding. Is that right?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. If you look at it in these terms, that kind of a good lead. While you're doing IBR, you're really not you're not even hitting all the interest. If you look at it in these terms, right now the interest on this is about 3/4 of that 20-year payment, and so you're really not. And so the idea here is that you lower your payment for as long as you can, give you that good debt to income ratio, so that you can kind of pay your bills and kind of live, and then look for that forgiveness at the end. And so you're really.
But the reason I bring it up is just because if you suddenly say I was doing IBR for 10 years, suddenly I was offered this amazing position, I'm making $250,000 now.
Sure.
And I'm no longer eligible for IBR. My IBR would be maximum payment, right? And then I would be kind of, all that debt that I had kind of deferred,
right,
would be paying for. I could get burned for that.
Right. Well, there's a couple different things there. As long as you stay in IBR, so I think there's one item we kind of have to clear up. As long as you stay in IBR, meaning you don't leave IBR and go into any other kind of payment program, then your payment will never exceed, what your 10-year standard payment would be. And so in this case, this is based on a 20-year payment of $865, but I think the 10-year standard repayment, which is kind of what all loans kind of come out in that posture, until you do something with them, whether you consolidate them or change your posture. So I think for $109,000, it's about $1,200 a month. That's your standard repayment. Now, as long as you stay in IBR, it's never going to exceed that.
Okay.
And so that's kind of the cap for it.
Is there a maximum amount of salary that you cannot exceed to stay in IBR?
No, once you qualify for it, as long as you stay in it, you're in it. Yeah, and you don't have to recall. It's really one of the things that we don't really elaborate here, but once you establish what's called a partial financial hardship, then as long as you stay in IBR, that's you're kind of in it. But if you ever leave it, then you would have to reestablish it. If you were making a greater salary, then you wouldn't be able to reestablish it. I think that's the key. Okay, another question. All right.
Well, it seems like if you're not absolutely 100% sure that you're going to work for 20 years, though, it's not a good
Sure.
idea, right? So for women, for example, isn't that?
Oh, meaning.
If I'm going to work for 10 years and then who knows what's going to happen? I decide I hate law, I want to have kids, then I'm going to have like, a ton of debt.
I wouldn't presume that, but you're right. There are inherent kind kind of, I guess, risks involved with that, like in not locking yourself into kind of a 20-year period. And those are things, I guess the best way to do it is, one of the things that we do, we have that info card out there. You fill out that info card, we look at that in our assessment. We kind of look at different tax scenarios based on your feedback to us. It takes about 10 minutes to kind of fill out the survey. And then we come back to you. It's a complete internet, correspondence, and we give you kind of a sense of that. Sure.
I guess the question would be, is it your salary that determines it or your legal salary? Meaning if she switches and becomes a teacher, is it going to be capped at 10% of her new teacher's salary?
That's a good point.
Salary-based, or would it just be she's no longer eligible because she's not in a legal profession?
Yeah, these programs aren't really set up for lawyers. It's really set up for educational debt. So don't think of it in terms of your field. Think of it in terms of the type of debt that you have.
And does it apply to any educational debt, like prior, like undergraduate school debt, undergrad debt?
Absolutely. Well, it really there's nuances to it, but in an overview or a basic sense, you have your subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loans and your Grad Plus loans, which is that's your 90%. Yeah, that's the majority of your debt. Private loans, it's not going to be in there, but the Perkins, if it's consolidated. So there's some nuances in there, but we take that all into account. But for the most part, you guys all have sub and unsub Stafford and Grad Plus loans. I think that's probably 90% of your debt portfolio, right?
I guess another question would be, do you have to enter the program immediately upon graduation? Or if 2 years out, say you were making a really, really high salary, 2 years out you realize you get laid off,
Sure.
you're a temporary lawyer, and you want to now enter the income-based repayment?
Sure.
Can
You
do that?
you could, and one of the things that we do is we look at it in terms of you may be able to enter it early if you consolidate. We'll talk about the consolidation period that's open right now. It's kind of rare, but if you could enter it while you're in school, and you can use your summer salary to make qualifying payments for public service loan forgiveness and for IBR. But like you said, if you came out and you're just in a standard payment program, something about your salary posture changes, then you get to choose kind of how you're repaying it. I mean, if you can't do it, there's other things out there. If you lost your job, there's things like economic hardship deferment. There's other things that you can do. If you're in school, you have in-school deferment. That's why you don't have to pay your loans right now. You're kind of in school deferment. So, all right, boy, we're good questions. I have 10 minutes, and so before we kind of open it up, so I'm going to go 10 minutes.
Can talk longer.
Fairly quickly, but I want to get into the public service, which is kind of about 20 of you guys, or 20% of you guys kind of raised your hands. So your standard repayment at for 10 years is going to be $1,200. But if you go into public service, because your salary is lower, that lowers your overall AGI. Your payment's going to be roughly in that 104 range, and that's a month. And so that significantly lowers the amount of debt that you're going to pay. And ultimately, you're going to pay about $10,000 over in that public service realm, and that'll be significantly lower than the amount of debt you actually have. You'll end up having a tremendous amount forgiven, and it's more than 90%. But this is essentially an incentive program, very much like you have Army College Fund GI Bill. That's an incentive to do military service. This is an incentive to go into public service as well. And the public service loan forgiveness is basically, you work for any local, state, or federal entity, or you work for a 501c3 nonprofit, something like that. Sure.
Do you know if that stacks with loan repayment programs via the schools, or does that just depend on the school's program?
The school you're talking
The
about?
Duke Loan Repayment Assistance Program?
Yeah, I think they're LRAPs is what they're called, and there are, we've actually done it. We did a presentation at Harvard recently because all of our executive staff is HBS guys, and the LRAP is one of those things that we are doing the kind of comparison and seeing if you can use them in tandem or what. But yeah, that's something that we're building that into our assessments as well. So
I'm sure you can use it with Duke.
yeah, absolutely.
You can just cancel out your debt, basically.
Yeah, and so, there's really a lot of opportunities to manage your debt. So let's talk about in-school consolidation. That's the other big one that I really wanted to talk about, because that's where you're at right now. So what happened with the student loan world is that in the last year, direct loans has basically become the only originator for new loans, which I'm sure you guys all know. But obviously everybody here probably went to undergrad and had, to a degree, some sort of loan. So you were probably dealing with maybe a Sallie Mae or somebody else like that. They call them a FEL lender. but it's basically a lender that is private, but they're lending under the Department of Education standards. And so what has happened is the Department of Education has opened up this window to allow students to consolidate all their loans, but the window it opened up in July and it's going to close at the end of June in the next year. But there's basically a few things that benefit the students for doing this consolidation. So we'll talk about the benefits. Does anybody here have a variable rate loan? Like anybody in undergrad in 06? No? Yeah. So if you were an undergrad in the kind of the 06 range, it's likely that you have a variable rate loan. Those loans are, if you locked them in now, they would be very, very low rate, kind of in that below 2% range, which is really good because I think if you guys know anything about the cost of your debt right now, it's either 7.9, 8.5, or 6.8. Those are kind of your big rates right now. Sure.
Like CFNC, like when the college in North Carolina, South Foundation North Carolina, is that it's similar, or would that count as like a Sallie Mae like private type thing? So I'm pretty sure I've locked it. Like I don't have variable rates.
Right. Well, it doesn't really have to do. I mean, it has to do with the lender, but there are still guidelines on the lenders. But if it was pre-06, it could very well be a variable rate loan. But if not, this is just one of those things where we talk about lock-in low rates, and I just wanted to make sure that was clear. You have the ability to consolidate loans. One of the other big things about the public service loan forgiveness is that all loans have to be, the loans that are considered for it have to be part of the direct loan program, meaning they have to be consolidated to, all to the federal government. And so anything that's outside that, so if you have a Sallie Mae loan, it's not, your payments aren't qualifying until it's locked in under the federal. And so once you consolidate it, then those loans will be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. So if you're really on that track, and say if you're a 2L or 1L or whatever, and you're going to do some summer job, and it's going to be at a public defender's office or something like that, then you can actually get 3 months of qualifying payments for public loan. And so it's really taking advantage of those incremental strategies. That's what our assessment does, and that's kind of what we look at. You can also position the loans to maximize subsidies. This is really about a lot of the ideas around the in-school consolidation are making sure that you file taxes even if you don't have like the requisite income to to necessitate the filing of taxes. That establishes your ability to do AGI, so you can go into income-based repayment, which essentially your payment will be very low. And then the other one is, the base. You have administrative simplicity, which is a single bill, and so in general we wouldn't say just because you want a single bill you should consolidate. We actually look at the pros and cons, but again, everything is about net benefits, and our assessments, we look at the kind of the incremental net benefits, and if it makes sense to do it, then that's typically what we recommend. And then the costs, if you consolidate everything together, this is kind of a risk, but if you took like high rate loans and low rate loans, consolidate them together, you might lose a little bit on the rate because consolidation works like this. It's a weighted average, and so you'll have a little bit of that. You'll also have potential loss of borrower benefits, but since very few people had variable rate loans, I don't think we really have a lot of borrower benefits. Those kind of disappeared around 08. And then you'll also have capitalization of accrued interest. Interest is going to accrue and capitalize eventually anyways, but this just happens during consolidation period. But again, we kind of look at the net benefits. All right. Let's talk about action plans. So if you're in school right now, and graduating, we'll go through a few different things. But you want to kind of determine whether your consolidation makes sense. You want to make sure that you're doing the tax preparation right, so you can establish that AGI. You want to kind of get a sense. The ongoing loan review is basically, what am I doing during the summer? Am I doing something that's related to public service, or am I doing something that's more IBR related, or both? Those are two things you need to consider. If you're graduating, you got to kind of figure out which structure is going to make sense. Your tax preparation is also big there. And then each track, whether you're a large firm, small firm, or a nonprofit, there's kind of a different strategy you want to kind of employ with both. Typically for the nonprofit, you want to make sure that you go into Public service loan forgiveness, I mean, that's your big one. But IBR is also going to be a component of that as well. Small firm,